There are some stories that defy all logic, all reason. Stories so strange they feel less like reality and more like a twisted echo from a forgotten world. And what I'm about to tell you is one of those stories. A story about a man, a voice, and a truth buried so deep it took a dream to unearth it. His name was Elijah Vance. He wasn't a detective, a hero, or a man of any particular fame. He was just a software engineer in Scottsdale, Arizona. A quiet man with a meticulous mind, a fondness for old jazz records, and a life that was, by all accounts, perfectly ordinary. He lived in a sun-baked house with his wife, Sarah, a vibrant artist who painted the desert landscapes in hues no one else could see. They were a picture of suburban contentment, a couple whose biggest daily conflict was deciding what to order for dinner. They had built a life on a foundation of solid, undeniable love. But like any old house, this foundation had a secret hidden in the crawlspace, a crack that was slowly, silently widening. Elijah was adopted. He'd known this his entire life. His adoptive parents, the Vances, were pillars of their community, two retired librarians who had given him a life overflowing with books and unconditional affection. They had never hidden the truth from him. They had simply presented it as a beautiful, unremarkable fact of his existence. "You were born from another woman's love," his mother, Eleanor, would say, "and you came to us because our love was waiting for you." He'd never felt a burning need to seek out his biological parents. The Vances were his family. The thought of a search felt disloyal, a betrayal of the quiet, profound peace they had built together. He had accepted his story as complete. But the universe, it seems, has its own way of writing a new chapter. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of night where the heat of the desert finally breaks, and the air turns cool and quiet. Elijah went to bed, a day of coding and mundane decisions behind him. He fell into a deep sleep, the kind of sleep that holds you captive, a blank canvas for the subconscious. And then the dream began. It wasn't a nightmare filled with monsters or a fantasy filled with magic. It was a room, an old, dimly lit room with a single, barred window. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something faintly floral like old lavender. In the center of the room, a woman lay on a bed. Her face was a blur, obscured by the haze of the dream, but her hands were thin and pale, gripping the worn fabric of a sheet. And then, a voice. It didn't boom or whisper. It resonated, a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in Elijah's very bones. "My son," it said. Just 2 words, but they hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He tried to speak, to move, to ask who she was, but he was frozen. He could only watch as a nurse, a silhouette of a person, entered the room and placed a small, bundled blanket in the woman's arms. The woman sobbed, her body racked with a silent grief that tore at Elijah's heart. He felt it, a primal ache of loss that wasn't his, but was somehow inextricably linked to him. And then she looked up, her eyes, still blurred, locked with his. The voice returned, clearer now, less a hum and more a direct plea. "My son, they took you. They said you were sick, that they could help. But they lied. The name they gave you, it's a lie. You are not a Vance. Find the hospital. The name is on the ledger. The name is Hopewell." And then the dream fractured, the image dissolving into a chaotic jumble of colors and sounds, like a television losing its signal. Elijah jolted awake, drenched in a cold sweat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a wild drumbeat in the silent darkness. Sarah stirred beside him, murmuring his name. "Elijah, you're okay." He couldn't answer. The dream wasn't a dream. It felt like a memory, a forgotten truth clawing its way back to the surface. The woman's voice, the raw grief, the single word, Hopewell, a hospital, in Scottsdale. He had never heard of it. He sat up, his mind racing, piecing together the fragments. "The name is a lie," she had said. That meant his birth name, the one he had never known, was buried somewhere. Buried in a ledger at a place called Hopewell. The next morning, his meticulous mind, the one he used for code, was focused on one thing and one thing only. Hopewell. A quick online search yielded nothing. No Hopewell Hospital in Scottsdale. No defunct medical center by that name. It was as if the place had never existed. This should have been the end of it. A logical person would have dismissed it as just a dream, a strange byproduct of the subconscious. But Elijah wasn't a logical person in that moment. He was a man with a voice in his head, a mother's voice, a plea that felt so real it burned. And this wasn't about a search for his birth parents anymore. It was about a lie, a deception so deep it had been carried for 3 decades. He had to know the truth. He had to find Hopewell, because if the name was a lie, what else was? And who exactly was he? The search for a place that didn't seem to exist became Elijah's quiet obsession. His wife, Sarah, noticed the change. He was distant, his mind always somewhere else. She'd find him late at night, a laptop screen glowing on his face, scrolling through historical records, old maps, anything that might mention a hospital called Hopewell. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the whole truth. How do you explain that your entire life's foundation was called into question by a voice in a dream? She would worry. She would think he was losing his mind. So he kept it to himself, a silent, all-consuming quest that drove a wedge into the tranquil life they had so carefully built. He expanded his search beyond simple online queries. He spent weekends at the local library, a place he hadn't visited since he was a child. He delved into microfilms of old newspapers, searching for any mention of a hospital closure or a land deal. He spoke to retired librarians, to elderly residents at a local community center. The name Hopewell was a ghost. No one had ever heard of it. The logical mind would have given up. The trail was cold. The dream was just a dream. But the voice wasn't a dream. It was a memory. He could still hear it, a low hum of pain and love. And that memory, that single, unshakable memory, was a beacon in the dark. One afternoon, a frail old woman at the community center, a former city hall clerk named Margaret, finally gave him a thread to pull. He had shown her the sketch of the room he'd drawn from his dream, the barred window and the specific placement of the bed. She peered at it through thick glasses, her brow furrowed. That looks like the old county sanatorium, she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. But they closed that place in the 90s, rebranded it. It was for people with nervous conditions, they called it back then. He felt a jolt of electricity. What was it called before? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hopewell, she said, without hesitation. Hopewell Sanatorium. The old folks still call it that. The word hit him like a physical blow. Not a hospital. A sanatorium. A place for the mentally ill. A place for those who were considered broken. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. His birth mother wasn't sick. She wasn't weak. She was likely institutionalized. Why? And if she was there, how could they have taken him? He thanked Margaret, his mind already racing. He had to go there. The old sanatorium was now a high-end retirement community, a place called Desert Bloom. The irony was a punch to the gut. A place of pain and sorrow, now a haven of tranquility and golf carts. He went that very day. The sprawling complex was surrounded by manicured lawns and fountains, a stark contrast to the grim, spectral image in his mind. He walked through the gates, his heart pounding. The main building, he learned, had been the original sanatorium. He approached the front desk, a grand mahogany counter where a cheerful young woman in a blazer greeted him. He feigned an interest in the facility for his aging parents. The woman was helpful, offering a brochure and a tour, but Elijah's eyes were searching. They were looking for something specific. A ledger, a record, a list of names. He was led on a tour through pristine hallways, the air smelling of fresh polish and potpourri. He was shown immaculate rooms and common areas. But all he saw was the ghost of the place, the shadowed corridors from his dream, the echo of that woman's voice. He asked the young woman, as casually as he could, about the history of the building. She smiled. Oh, it's quite a story. It was an old sanatorium, you know, but we've completely renovated everything. All the old records and files. They were all sent to a storage facility in the city before the renovation. He felt a wave of relief and a surge of dread. The records existed. But where? He pressed her, his voice a little too eager. A storage facility? Do you know which one? She furrowed her brow. I'm not sure, sir. You'd have to ask the head of administration. He's not in today. It was a dead end. But he had a name. And he had a location. He spent the rest of the tour pretending to be interested, his mind already formulating a new plan. He had to get access to those records. He had to find that ledger. He had to find his name. And more importantly, he had to find out why his birth mother was there and who took him. He returned home that evening, the lie he was living weighing on him. Sarah was making dinner. She looked at him, her artistic eye catching the tension in his shoulders, the strain around his eyes. Elijah, what's going on? She asked gently. You seem so far away. He looked at her, at the woman he loved more than anything, and the lie felt like a physical burden. He wanted to tell her, to share this incredible, terrifying journey he was on. But the voice in the dream had warned him. A lie, a deep, decades-long lie. He didn't know who was involved. He didn't know how far it went. He couldn't risk her safety. It's just work, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A big project. I'm just stressed. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze filled with a quiet concern, and then she nodded, a silent acceptance of his half-truth. He knew, in that moment, that he was walking a lonely and dangerous path, a path his dream had set him on, a path to a truth that might shatter everything he knew. The head of administration's name was Arthur Thorne. Finding him wasn't easy. Elijah had to use every trick he knew, every software engineering hack to dig up public records, cross-reference data, and finally track down a phone number and an address. Thorne was a man in his late 70s, retired from his role at Desert Bloom for nearly a decade. He lived in a quiet, unassuming house on a tree-lined street. Elijah felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach as he pulled up to the curb. He was no longer just a man looking for his history. He was a man about to confront the past, to peel back the layers of a truth that was beginning to feel less like a mistake and more like a deliberate act. He knocked on the door, his heart hammering. A frail, bespectacled man with a shock of white hair answered. Arthur Thorne. Elijah introduced himself, his voice shaking slightly. My name is Elijah Vance. I was born in Scottsdale in 1995. I was adopted. I believe I was born at what used to be the Hopewell Sanatorium. I was told the records were sent to storage, and you might know where they are. Thorne's face went pale. His hand, which had been resting on the doorframe, trembled. The records? He said, his voice a dry, reedy rasp. Those were destroyed. Years ago. Fire in the warehouse. Elijah's heart sank. He knew it was a lie. The man's eyes, filled with a sudden, palpable fear, told him everything. No, Elijah said, his voice firm now, his fear replaced by a cold resolve. They weren't destroyed. Someone told me they were moved. I need to see them. I need to know the truth. Thorne backed away, a look of profound terror on his face. I can't help you, he whispered, trying to close the door. But Elijah was a man on a mission. My mother, he said, the words a desperate plea. She was there. A woman named. She didn't give me her name. She said they lied. She said they took me. I need to know why. The word mother seemed to break something in Thorne. He stopped pushing the door and looked at Elijah, a deep, sorrowful look in his eyes. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. You don't know what you're asking. It's not a simple story. It's a lie that was built to protect. To protect you. Thorne led him inside, the house smelling of mothballs and old paper. They sat in a dusty living room, the air thick with unspoken secrets. I was a young administrator then, Thorne began, his voice barely audible. Just starting out. The sanatorium was a desperate place. Families would send their loved ones there, anyone with a mental illness, anyone who was difficult. It was all about money and reputation, especially for the families of the wealthy and powerful. They didn't want the stain of madness on their names. He paused, his gaze fixed on a point far away, as if watching a ghost. Your mother was different. Her name was Evelyn Thorne. No relation. A beautiful, brilliant woman. A poet. She had a manic-depressive episode. Not dangerous, not a threat, but her family. They were old money. Old and cruel. They couldn't have a crazy daughter. So they had her committed. Elijah felt a sharp, gut-wrenching pain. Evelyn. His mother's name was Evelyn, and she had been a poet. He saw the dim room in his dream, the artist's hands gripping the sheet. It wasn't just a dream. It was his mother, a poet. Her mind a landscape of both beautiful light and crushing darkness, trapped in a place of despair. Thorne continued, his voice heavy with guilt. She was pregnant when she was admitted. A secret. The family kept it quiet. They had it all arranged. The baby would be born and then it would be given away. A sick baby. That was the cover story. The baby would be declared too ill to survive, and then it would be quietly adopted out. Elijah's blood ran cold. He felt the words of the voice in his dream. They said you were sick, echo in his ears. It was all a lie, a calculated, deliberate lie to steal him from his mother. But the details were still blurry. How did they get away with it? Who was they? Elijah asked the question a low growl. Who did this? Thorne flinched. The family, her family, and the doctor in charge of her case. A man who was well respected. A man who promised them a clean slate. Dr. Warren Vance. The world seemed to spin on its axis. The air rushed out of Elijah's lungs. Vance. His adoptive father's name. No, couldn't be. My father's name is Robert Vance, Elijah stammered, his mind reeling. He's a retired librarian. Thorne shook his head slowly. Robert is his brother. Warren was the older, more powerful one. The one who made the decisions. He was the one who was supposed to dispose of the problem. Thorne stood up, his body trembling with the weight of the secret he had carried for 3 decades. He gave you to his brother and his wife. He said they wanted a family and that you were the answer. They were good people. They gave you a good life. A normal life. He did it to protect you from the truth, from your family, from what they were capable of. The truth was a poison, a slow-acting venom that was now coursing through Elijah's veins. He was not just adopted. He was stolen. And his adoptive father's brother was the thief. The man who had given him a new name, a new life, a new family, was the very same man who had taken him from his biological mother. The irony was a bitter, choking taste in his mouth. His mind flashed back to his childhood, to his adoptive parents, Robert and Eleanor Vance. They were so kind, so loving. Did they know? Did they know they were complicit in this monstrous deception? Did they know he was a lie? The truth was a labyrinth, and every step he took was pulling him deeper into a web of deceit he never knew existed. And he wasn't just a lost son anymore. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The air in Arthur Thorne's house was suddenly too thin to breathe. Elijah stood up, his legs shaky. The world had just been turned on its head. He wasn't just a man who had been adopted. He was a child who had been stolen, and the mastermind was a man he had known his entire life as an uncle, a figure of quiet authority, a man who, until now, had been a distant but benevolent presence at family gatherings. The idea that Uncle Warren had orchestrated this, had placed him in a family that was, in some twisted way, a witness to the crime, was a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. He left Thorne's house in a daze, the details of the conversation a chaotic whirlwind in his mind. He needed to get home. He needed to see Sarah. He had lied to her, told her it was just a stressful project at work. How could he possibly explain this? He couldn't. Not yet. He had to confront the source of the truth first. He had to confront Robert and Eleanor Vance, the parents who had raised him, who had loved him, who had given him everything. The question was, did they know? Were they victims, or were they accomplices? He arrived home, and the sight of his perfectly normal life, Sarah painting a vibrant desert scene in the sunroom, the smell of dinner on the stove, was an unbearable contrast to the chaos inside his head. He found his voice, a low, trembling whisper. Sarah, I need to go see my parents. Something's happened. I can't explain right now. The look on her face was a mixture of fear and confusion, but she didn't question him. She just nodded, her eyes full of a love that was now, for the first time, laced with a new and painful uncertainty. He got in the car and drove, his hands tight on the wheel, heading toward the quiet house where he had grown up, a house that might hold the key to the final, agonizing piece of this puzzle. He found them in their usual evening routine. His father, Robert, was in his armchair, reading a book. His mother, Eleanor, was knitting on the couch. The image was so serene, so comforting, it felt like a betrayal in and of itself. He stood in the doorway, his heart a frantic bird in a cage. "We need to talk," he said, the words strained. "All of us." His father looked up, his brow furrowed in concern. "Elijah? What is it, son?" Elijah didn't mince words. He laid it all out. The dream, the voice, the search for Hopewell Sanatorium, Arthur Thorne, the name Evelyn, and finally, the name that hung in the air like a storm cloud, Warren Vance. His parents' faces went from confusion to a deep, heart-wrenching sorrow. His mother dropped her knitting, the needles clattering to the floor. His father closed his book, his hands trembling. He had his answer. They knew. His father, Robert, finally spoke, his voice a broken whisper. "It was Warren," he said. "He said your mother was a danger to herself and to you, that her family was powerful and would have done anything to make sure she never found you. He said he had saved you. He told us we were the only ones who could give you a safe, normal life." His mother, Eleanor, was weeping now, her face buried in her hands. "He brought you to us when you were just a day old," she sobbed. "A tiny, perfect baby. He told us your birth mother had passed away in childbirth. We never questioned it. We wanted you so badly. We never knew. We never knew he had stolen you." Elijah felt a wave of conflicting emotions. The monstrous lie was real. His uncle was a thief. But his parents were not accomplices. They were victims, too. They had been lied to, manipulated, their desire for a family exploited for a darker purpose. Their love for him, the love he had always felt, was real. It was a love built on a foundation of a lie, but it was a love that had blossomed and thrived despite the deceit. Did you ever see her?" Elijah asked, his voice raw. Robert looked at Eleanor and then back at his son. "Once," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Warren took me to see her years later. He said she was better, that she had recovered. She was a different person. Empty. He said she was an example of what would have happened to you if he hadn't intervened. He said she was a danger to you." I saw the look in her eyes, a look of a mother who had lost her child. And I believed him. I didn't want to, but I believed him. The pieces fell into place, the final, horrifying image. A mother, her mind broken not by illness, but by loss. A family that had erased her. A brother who had stolen her son and then used her pain as a justification for his crime. But one piece was still missing. The dream. The voice. "How?" "The dream," Elijah whispered, the last question hanging in the air. The voice in the dream. The name Hopewell. How could she have reached me? Eleanor looked up, her face tear-stained. She sent something, she said, her voice a fragile wisp. She wrote to me a few times, before she passed away. Small notes. Warren told me she was a family friend, a patient who had recovered, and these were letters of gratitude. I kept them all. One of them, it was different. It had a poem in it. A poem about a son, about a voice in a dream that would lead him home. I never understood what it meant. I just kept it. She went to a small writing desk and pulled out a worn, leather-bound box. Inside, among old photos and dried flowers, was a small, folded piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant, swirling. The ink faded with time. The last two lines were a single, profound truth. My love is a whisper, a voice in a dream. It will lead you home, my son. It will wash you clean. Elijah took the paper, his hands trembling. The words were a final gift from a mother he never knew, a poet who had used her art to send a message across time and space. Her final act of love was not a search, but a poem, a prophecy that had lain dormant in his subconscious until the time was right. It wasn't a voice in a dream. It was a poem in a letter, a poem that had been read to him as a child, perhaps, or simply absorbed into the depths of his memory. It had been his mother's final, desperate attempt to reclaim her son. And it had worked. The truth had finally come to light. The story of Elijah Vance is a story about a lie, a betrayal, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her son. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the truth isn't buried in a dusty archive or a forgotten ledger. Sometimes it's hidden in the quiet corners of our own minds, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And when it does, it can change everything. It can shatter a life built on a lie, but it can also reveal a love so profound, it can transcend time itself. If this incredible story of a son's journey to his past resonated with you, and if you believe that every story deserves to be told, then do me a favor. Take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next incredible true story we uncover. And share this video with a friend who loves a good mystery, because trust me, this is one they won't want to miss.